Picture the scene. A gathering inside an atmospheric, busy space, one that everyone wants to be in. There's even a queue at the door. And the main attraction, well, it's the draw of bright lights. What I'm describing isn't a nightclub in a city centre, but a scene on the seabed. Instead of a dance floor, the space is the inside of a converted lobster pot, a rectangular basket with a mesh on all sides. Queuing to get into this pot is a species that's one of the great seafood delicacies, scallops. And the thing attracting them to force their way inside is a bright light, a bulb placed inside that beams out across the ocean floor. Which is why, when the shellfish are caught this way, they're called disco scallops.
We've realised that you can actually attract scallops to swim into crab pots if you put a light inside it, something that's never been discovered before.
This is marine scientist and inventor Dr. Robert Enever. And in the context of disco scallops, think of him as the DJ.
The light hangs upside down from the roof of the pot, and it splays the light out. So if you imagine like a lighthouse has got like a lens in it, that basically splays the light out, and so the scallops in and around the area are able to see that light, and they, for some reason, they get attracted to the light, swim through the entrances, and then sit quite calmly. Once they're in the pot, they're not trying to get out, they just sit because they're satiated by the light. It's bizarre.
Disco scallops are one of the 3 special innovations we'll be exploring in this edition. All linked to food, all have the potential to tackle some of the big problems caused by what we currently eat and how we produce it. In the case of disco scallops, a simple lobster pot with a light bulb is an important invention because, at a time when we need to conserve biodiversity and protect ecosystems, it could be an alternative to the conventional and more destructive approach of harvesting scallops around the world, dredging.
The dredge itself is a very heavy steel rectangular frame with a chainmail net that's dragged over the seabed to catch the scallops.
Mark Duffy of Natural England.
So that's several tons of steel being towed at 3 to 4 knots across the seabed, and things like pink sea fans, which are erect fragile corals, won't withstand that.
Disco scallops have a pretty much zero impact approach, and if the technique can be scaled up, it'll be a significant and welcome innovation, which is the case with all of the food stories we'll be hearing, such as a delicious and radical chocolate bar made with high quality ingredients at risk of being thrown away.
Orange peel, even though it is food waste, and a lot of companies just see it as food waste to be thrown away, it's something to still be respected.
And we'll visit a forest filled with food, providing insights into the ingredients we might be growing more of in future.
This is a Szechuan pepper. We're just going underneath here. Extremely aromatic. You can smell that. They're quite strong. They'll make your lips numb for a few minutes.
That's okay.
Ouch. How I wish I'd listened. So 3 very different innovations, and all 3 are part of a serious process. One of the stories you're about to hear will become a BBC Food and Farming Awards winner. Listen and see if you can predict what the judges end up choosing. Let's get back to that underwater disco and the lights drawing some of the scallops of Lyme Bay to what will be their last dance. From the harbour of Lyme Regis, I headed out to sea with fisherman John Shuker and his son Sam, who, at 26, is at the start of his fishing career. A few miles out, and the 26-foot boat slowed alongside an orange buoy, a marker for some of the pioneering disco scallop pots. As Sam started to pull up a rope with a winch along which the pots were tied, John explained the system.
So what's happening?
Well, we pulled the pot up, and now he's taking the scallops out of the pot
And there's a starfish in the pot. They actually eat the scallops. So he's taking the scallops out, putting them in the tray, and there's a light in the pot, and that attracts the scallops. And they go through there's an entrance there which has got a one-way gate on it, and they get in and then they can't get out.
How many pots are down there?
These are in fleets of 10, so there's 10 on a string. And then we've got just over 100 pots. That's a really good pot, that.
In each of the pots, attracted by the specially designed light, were around 40 to 50 scallops. Each one was checked for size to see if it was a keeper or a juvenile to be returned to the sea. And it's clear there's a skill to using this new technique. A year ago, Sam was finding few scallops inside the pots. Now, he understands exactly where to place them to increase the size of that catch.
And then this year I put them out. I thought, well, I could just give them another try. Water's a bit warmer. And then all of a sudden, I'm pulling up 60, 30, 20, another 70 out of the pots. I'm thinking, wow, okay, there might actually be something to this. And it's just basically been like that all summer. It's been quite a miracle.
There's a bit of know-how in terms of how to use them, where to place them, and...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you want them absolutely on the scallops. I mean, unlike a normal pot where they're coming up, basically when you're paying them next to a reef, they can be a few metres away from there, away from the burrow, and that lobster will travel. Scallops, they need to see that light while they're down there. If they're not next to it when you've paid it, they're just not going to go in. So, you know, you want to know where that scallop is, or need an idea, and then pay directly on that mark with your tides correct.
So it's a new technology, it's a new way of doing things, and therefore I'm no surprise there's a bit of a learning curve.
It's a new skill. I mean, this pot is, I like to think these as my kind of Swiss Army knives. You know, I can use these for cutles, I can use these for scallops, I can use these hopefully for octopus, and I mean, if nothing else works, you know, they are a lobster pot as well. It's just trying to understand when it's the right time and how they exactly work. It's, you know, it's new, so it's obviously going to be a new way for everyone to fish.
With us on board is Mark Duffy of Natural England, the organisation providing scientific advice on marine systems and the impact of different fishing practices.
So right now we're about a mile from the shore. We're in the middle of the marine protected area, which is a special area of conservation. And prior to 2008, this area would have been dredged and was very productive grounds for the scallop dredges. But after the closure, they were still able to fish along the line, and eventually the catches that they had historically were still maintained after the closure.
So, these two approaches to catching scallops coexist in and around the marine protected area of Lyme Bay. Within the zone, since 2008, dredging has been banned, marine biodiversity has recovered, and small-scale fishers such as Sam and John are experimenting with the low-impact disco scallop pots. Outside the zone and along other parts of the UK's coastline, dredging continues, and it's big business. 100 million scallops are caught each year, mostly for export. And there's no quota with scallops. There's no limit on how many can be caught. However, in this post-Brexit era, in England and Wales, this system is being reviewed, and there could, in future, be tighter controls placed on dredging and scallop fishing, which is why innovation and the disco scallops matter. Over to Robert Enever of FishTech, the developer of this new system.
So FishTech is quite a unique company. It's a group of conservation engineers and fisheries scientists that design and manufacture technology to enable more sustainable fishing practice.
For example, FishTech develops technology that helps reduce the risk of bycatch.
So if they're targeting a Dover sole but they accidentally entangle a dolphin, the dolphin would be a bycatch event in that fishery. And so some of the solutions that we have for those incidences, we develop acoustic devices to deter them away from the nets.
The disco scallop pots are less of an invention, more an example of discovery.
So what you're looking at here is a standard crab and lobster fishing pot, but it's been modified slightly.
So this looks like, if people are picturing that, it almost looks like in the shape of a treasure chest,
yes.
You could say.
Yeah.
But obviously with netting all around it and an access point for whatever you're trying to catch.
Exactly right. So it's a mesh-covered pot, and the bait used in this is actually light instead of bait. And that is the thing that we've realised and we've discovered, is that you can actually attract scallops to swim into crab pots if you put a light inside it.
If I was diving under the sea, how far out is this light emitting?
So given that it's probably 6 inches above the seabed, then the light is probably going to emit very localised, so maybe like a metre around the pot. So that would be the sort of expanse of light. So the light shines down and out.
And what colour is the light?
It's a white light. We've tried lots of different colours, but white seems to be the one that attracts them the best.
Now, you say it's bizarre. Why?
It's bizarre because no one's discovered this before. Like fishing using light dates back to, biblical times, but for some reason no one's connected light with scallops, and we found it just purely by accident. The reason we know it works is because we undertook scientific experiments, and we had pots with lights and pots without lights, the same entrances, and sure enough, every time you hauled a pot with a light, you'd have scallops in the pots, and every time you hauled a pot without a light, there were no scallops at all. The most we've ever seen in a pot that was recorded by a fisherman was 200 scallops in one pot. And actually we had a record haul last week in Cornwall where we had a fisherman land 2,300 keepers, so above the minimum landing size, scallops from just 100 pots. So he's doing incredibly well. So absolutely economically viable to these people. And it's not just the catching of the scallops, also it's the price they're getting, because there's such demand for this sort of this low impact form of fishing.
How did it come into existence?
So it's a good question. It was complete accident, lucky accident. So we were working with fishermen on the east coast of the United States in their snow crab fisheries, and we realised, or others had realised, that if you put a light in a crab pot, then you could increase the catches of snow crab, and that's really important in that fishery, because if you can get them to meet their quota, which is like the amount of crab they can catch more quickly, then actually one of the big issues in that fisheries was the entanglement of whales in the string going to the surface.
So speed up the process, you can reduce the risk.
Exactly. And so once we've developed it, and one of the things that we do at Fish Tech is scattergun. We'll put those products out to other fisheries, and we'll say, right, let's try it in the Dungeness crab fishery, let's try it in the Tampa Bay fishery. And we sent a load to a colleague of mine, John Ashworth, down in Cornwall, who was fishing for crab and lobster. And I gave him 100 lights and I said, look, just try them out. Tell us what you think. Does it improve your crab and lobster? We weren't thinking about scallops at all at the time. And a month later, he got back. He said, no, there's no real noticeable difference in crab and lobster. But I did notice I was getting loads and loads of scallops in my pots. I was like, oh, interesting. Why? What are we talking here? Like, he said, well, normally I'd see 5 to 10 scallops in a year, like out of 32,000 pots. And I said, well, what were you seeing here? And it represented like a 1,500-fold increase. And I was like, my goodness me, this cannot be a coincidence. That started this process of investigating this discovery. And sure enough, the first time we went aboard, we had boxes of scallops on a design that hadn't been thought through. So it was a proper eureka moment. I remember shaking. My background is in marine protected areas and sort of conservation advice and, setting up marine conservation zones. And I knew how important this discovery was.
I'm Mark Duffy. I am the Principal Advisor for Fisheries in the Greener Farming and Fisheries team within Natural England. Lyme Regis in Dorset is in the middle of the Jurassic Coast. And the Jurassic Coast, is very famous for the fossils. And indeed, it's the geology of Lyme Bay which makes this a very special place. Out there under the waves, you have sandstone, limestone and mudstone arranged and it's evolved over time to a series of furrows and ridges that have been colonised by a whole range of different marine species. And this is one of the most biodiverse parts of the country. So those species include first and foremost, pink sea fans, which is looks like a fan. It's pink in colour, up to about 50 centimetres tall, grows erect from the seabed, and this is a Gorgonian coral. Yes, you heard correct, a coral that we have here in England. And indeed, there are other corals here, the sunset cup coral, which looks like an anemone, but is actually a coral. It's yellow-orange and is tiny, it's about 8 millimetres across. Also, there are a range of sea squirts, sponges, and of course fish. cod, haddock, hake, sea bream, sea bass, conger eel. And then, of course, there are the shellfish, crab, lobster, and indeed scallops.
And at this point, we should properly introduce the species.
So Pecten maximus, it's about 10 centimetres across. If you think of that petrol station that uses the Shell logo, that's what they look like. But when they're alive and they're in the water, they're actually remarkably colourful. They've got like a rainbow mantle with little cilia that poke out, and around that up to maybe 200 light-sensitive organs, which are basically primitive eyes.
Which is how they're drawn inside the illuminated pots. Currently, 150 UK fishers are using the disco scallop technology. In Sam's case, they've proved to be a lifeline. The waters around the south coast have been changing, he told me. The octopus population is increasing, and as they're predators, the number of lobsters, he says, being caught in the bay is decreasing.
I don't think I would be going if I didn't have this for this year. It's a bit apocalyptic right now, so I think it's definitely a saving grace to have these, just so I have something to really lean back on.
And there's more to this innovation than a light bulb and a pot. An important part of this approach is a new supply chain through which the disco scallops are being sold. Robert Enever.
Fishermen who were catching them in their pots needed a premium price, because as they're trying this new fishing method out, they might only be getting 20, 40, 50, 100 scallops, and so they needed to get a high price for that. And if they didn't have a market or they landed it on their existing markets in a box or something on Brixton Market, then they would get a low price for that and they'd be disincentivized to carry on. So we knew a key part of this puzzle really was to create a premium label for the product and have buyers of that product.
And a necessary part of that supply chain are chefs and their restaurants.
Here we go. So this is just opening. These are tightly closed, and what I'm going to do is just insert a knife in there and just run the knife along the top shell, so to just loosen that muscle. And as soon as that muscle has broken the top there, inside you can see that wonderful scallop. And look at it, the scallop meat inside is just translucent.
The chef, Mitch Tonks, has done more than most to celebrate British fish and fishers. Through his chain of 11 rockfish restaurants from Poole to Plymouth, he's sourcing from some of the smallest and most artisanal boats around our coast. And he's added disco scallops to the menu.
When they're as good as this, one of the joys of really good seafood is to eat it in its completely raw state. I mean, the texture is like nothing else you've ever had.
And there is this sweetness.
Inherent sweetness down, and it's pretty spectacular.
It's much lower impact, but it's also a much smaller scale, so there must be an impact on the economics of the scallop. What is that?
These are a premium product. We need to pay more for them. I mean, the fishermen are getting 2 and 3 times, depending on the time of the year, than they would for a dredged scallop. And that's recognising that there is a smaller catch. But actually, I think consumers want to eat food like that. I think there's naturally a certain element of people that, if you haven't explained the story properly and they look at sort of north of 20 quid for 3 scallops, they feel like that's an expensive proposition. But I think once people understand it, it's no problem. And to say that we sell every single scallop in the restaurant or through our online seafood market, anything that comes disco scallop-wise gets sold. So I would say that's probably a lot more people prepared to pay for it and understand the issues.
Fisherman Sam Shuka.
I mean, it's all good having the method to cultivate this, but it doesn't make a difference if no one's actually buying it. And really, rockfish, that is the best market I could ask for, especially for something new as this, that it needs that infrastructure and it needs to get to the consumer that they understand what they're buying.
I think the other really important thing, this is genuinely fisherman and restaurateur working together, right? It's really difficult because most fish has to go through an auction, the supply chain, and in something as simple as this and something as local as this, and we hope more restaurants and more people, that's the whole point of the project, will be demanding disco scallops in restaurants, and there'll be more pots on the ground and there'll be more people consuming them. But this is genuinely lining up people or aligning people with fishermen, which I think is so important.
From the scallops of Lyme Bay, let's head further west into Cornwall to hear about an innovation in the world of chocolate.
So we've come through to the actual chocolate production. So downstairs is where we make the chocolate, and then upstairs is where we turn it into things.
On the outskirts of Falmouth, in a 2-storey building on an industrial estate, production is underway in Cornwall's only bean-to-bar chocolate business, Chocolada. A member of the 10-person team is Becca Lazar, and she's showing me along the production line where machinery, some very new, some vintage and elegant, is whirring away.
It kind of follows a linear line. We've got the cracker and winnower, so this is where we remove the shell and then separate it from the nibs using air. So we've got Mr. McCracken, who, as much as he wants to retire, he's an antique marzipan machine that we've tried to retire so many times, but just no one cracks like him. We're slightly stuck with him, but he is a beautiful machine held together with straps.
I'm Mike Longman. Before starting the company, I was a pastry chef working with chocolate in the pastry kitchen, and that's kind of where I fell in love and out of love with chocolate.
As a chef in a restaurant, Mike wanted to use chocolate made from carefully sourced cacao, processed as locally as possible. But most of the places he looked, he encountered the same global supply chain.
And it turned out that every single chocolate company we spoke to, every single chocolate factory they professed to be, was buying the same chocolate we were buying off of wholesalers and then branding it up. So I did what every good chef does and said, I'll just do it myself, and set into the deepest rabbit hole.
One that led not only to Mike skilling up to become a chocolate maker, but also an expert in sourcing beans from supply chains closely linked to farmers. Part of an ambition, he says, to support communities in different parts of the world and make as little impact on the environment as possible.
At the moment, we're sourcing from a number of ever-changing farms: Peru, Dominican Republic, Ghana, Sao Tome. We've been in Madagascar. We have some Solomon Islands. So the whole breadth of the planet. Everything is very story-driven. When we find amazing projects that we want to work with, that's where we want to be. So we've been working with RSPB to pay a premium to cocoa farmers that are harvesting within rainforest, and they're able to be the first whistleblowers when they see trucks coming in, illegal logging, illegal mining, anything that's going to be detrimental to the rainforest, to their environment, to their industry, to their income. They have a network that they're able to raise the alarm. The more within that network, the better.
And Mike also wanted his chocolate to make an impact through the other ingredients he could add to his recipes, an approach which gave the company its name.
So the story behind that is that wild gorse flowers, if you don't know, they are the bane of every farmer down here. Big prickly bushes that pop up everywhere, really difficult to get rid of, but the flowers, after a nice bathing of sunshine, smell like coconut. So we're able to go out in beautiful sunny days, pick the petals and infuse it into the cocoa butter that we produce here, and it imparts this lovely coconutty, kind of slightly floral coconut scent to the milk chocolate, which is one of a kind, absolutely lovely, absolutely wonderful. And that's what I set out to do as pastry chef, was to bring chocolate and that Cornish larder together, hence the name Chocolada, and bring in Cornish honeycomb that we make by hand from locally harvested honey, Cornish sea salt from just down the road. We wanted to kind of bring all these amazing flavours from Cornwall together with chocolate and make something that is very much the Cornish provenance being done right with that.
And so a great bean-to-bar chocolate business was born, one that's now in demand around the world. Then came the innovation that caught the attention of this year's BBC Food and Farming Awards judges, an idea prompted by a day trip.
We went down to our local beach cafe after a sunny day where they'd been juicing oranges for their fresh orange juice, and they had a bin next to the machine that they'd pop all of these kind of halves in hastily.
And we were down there having a meeting and watched them throw orange after orange after orange into a black sack destined for a biffa bin.
And so from quite early on, we knew that actually there was this kind of like really exciting conversation that we could help highlight through chocolate, about how a lot of waste isn't waste, it's just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The experience led them to contacting a food business that sources high quality fruit and makes orange juice on a large scale, Natura, which now sends boxes of peel for Chocolada to work with. To extract the flavour from the fruit and remove all of the moisture involves a process that takes days. But the result is a dark chocolate with an enticing, lighter coloured section at the centre.
You could basically kind of enjoy the dark chocolate on its own, the orange peel on its own, or enjoy them together.
But from that beginning, there were more and more kind of comings across the amount of food waste that is there, and it's awful. It's a terrible story to tell, but it's a wonderful conversation to start. We knew that we were never going to, looking at some of the statistics, we were never going to make an impact in the actual food waste world, but highlighting it, sticking a spotlight on it, celebrating food waste and what it can become is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to start that conversation in a really fun, interesting way.
With this breakthrough, they started a range of Chocolada bars called Again, all made with carefully sourced cacao and quality ingredients at risk of being wasted. The range became a way of collaborating with food businesses that had surplus ingredients, which is how a bar came to be made, with leftover croissants from North Cornwall's Watergate Bay Hotel, paired with used coffee grounds sourced from Monmouth Coffee, involving again some ingenious processing to integrate the flavours into a bar.
Getting croissant flavour into chocolate, this isn't grinding actual croissants isn't the cleverest way to do that, but saving those croissants that are left over from breakfast, is such a lovely story, and it's such a lovely picture. We've all been there at a hotel.
Croissant and coffee, the breakfast of dreams.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you know what? The hilarious thing is we've kept the croissant and coffee separate on that bar. And I always, whenever I'm describing it to people, I always say that you can either be that really crazy person that dunks your croissant in your coffee and has it together, or you can be really civilised and have them separately so that you can still taste the croissant and you can still taste the coffee.
And in the third Again bar are two more prized ingredients.
So this is rhubarb and ginger. So this is using waste from a cereal manufacturer to save what would have been end of line. So in mass production, you kind of get to the end of line, whether that's because of packaging constraints or one piece of the puzzle isn't there.
The heartbreaking thing with this was it was freeze-dried rhubarb and crystallised ginger. So the amount of processing that had gone into creating those ingredients for them to just be surplus to requirements in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were able to swoop in and rescue them.
More bars are in development featuring other quality ingredients in need of rescue. This is an innovation based around the idea of a circular economy in which different businesses can come together to reduce waste, make an impact, tell an important story, raise awareness, and all done in a very delicious way. We're staying in the southwest for our third and final story. This time we're in Devon, on the outskirts of Totnes. 35 years ago, Martin Crawford planted an innovative forest, a food forest he walked me through this summer. Let's go for a walk.
Yeah. The vision was to create a forest garden or a food forest. Those two terms are used interchangeably in different parts of the world. And what that is it's a very unique structure. It's not actually as dense as a forest, as you'll see as when we walk around, but it's using the natural structure of a forest and trying to utilise what happens in natural ecosystems to make it very efficient, very sustainable.
Planted across 2 acres of the Dartington estate, the food forest consists of tall trees, bushes, shrubs and a dense understory. Some parts look wild, but as the trail takes you through twists and turns, you notice there's a carefully managed structure at work here.
Forests are wonderful things, but a high forest that's very dark and dense underneath doesn't produce a lot of food for people. There might be something right high up if you're lucky. But you'll see as we walk through here, the density is much less than a forest, so there's lots of light getting all the way down to the ground in places, dappled light, which means you can actually grow productive things at all different heights, right down to ground level. And so it becomes a much, much more productive system in terms of crops that are useful to humans.
One of the big ideas, and I don't know if this was the vision right at the very beginning, but this isn't a story of you just thinking about what are the indigenous plants of Devon, for example. You've taken a far more global view of what this can become.
Yes, absolutely. I am often asked, well, can I make a food forest or a forest garden just out of native plants, native British plants? And you can, but my answer is you'll probably starve. Because there aren't enough good edibles, as what's counted as native. And of course, almost all the plant foods we eat are non-native, from wheat and potatoes to onions and garlic and cornflakes. I don't know, you can go on and on. None of those things are native foods. So if you want a heavily plant-based diet in our climate, you have to grow foods from different parts of the world. There's no choice about that.
And the last time he counted, there were 500 different species here.
We're walking past some Turkish rocket plants, which is a perennial vegetable. The yellow flowers are the last of the flowers on those. There's also a bit of comfrey in here, which is not here as an edible, because not a lot, but some of the plants in any sustainable growing system are system plants. They have to be there to help the system function. So they could be bee plants, for example, or plants that attract beneficial insects, or plants that fix nitrogen. So a farmer might use a clover to do that, fix nitrogen in part of their rotation. And what we do is we use these tall trees to do the same thing. These are Italian alder, the tallest trees above us, and those are nitrogen fixing trees. So they are circulating nitrogen through the system and keeping it productive. So as we walk into the understory here, you can look around you and you can see there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on at ground level. There's lots of perennial vegetables here, particularly spring vegetables. So, for example, the fern here is ostrich fern or shuttlecock fern from North America and Siberia, and you eat the fiddleheads, the little shoots off that. Really delicious crop. Very early, comes through here end of February, so it's the first new vegetable up of the year.
Before planting the food forest, Martin had been a market gardener. Inspired by British agroforestry pioneers of the 1970s, he set out to see how productive trees and perennial plants could be. Perhaps, he thought, there were other ways of feeding people beyond the annual crops of wheat, rice and maize.
I guess the whole idea was that, it was an experiment to see, is it possible, and to try and create this kind of agro-ecosystem that functions like a forest. So all the nutrition happens naturally. I don't have to go in and feed things, which you don't do in a forest, of course, because natural systems do it themselves. And we can utilise all those sorts of things in here. So I wanted to try and create that system. There was one or two people had started these kind of things before me, but nobody had really taken it through, to kind of this degree. And I was convinced it was possible. So my aim was to prove that. Another factor that made me want to start this was climate change. So, 30 years ago or 35 years ago, obviously it wasn't dominating the headlines like it often does now, but I was completely aware of that, and completely aware that actually growing annuals is probably much, much less sustainable in an era of climate change than growing diverse perennial-based system. And that's because annuals are very prone to drought, for example, and a lot of this country's got one right now. And it's really affecting all annuals, whereas this forest garden is unaffected by drought because of the way it functions like a natural ecosystem. So that was a big part of why I wanted to do this. It's interesting because, agricultural scientists have avoided looking at these systems because they're too complex. And obviously traditional agricultural science likes looking at, like, monocrops or possibly two things growing together. Oh, that's quite a push sometimes, even that. And here there's hundreds of things growing together. And how do you can't approach that and analyse that in the same way because everything's interacting with everything else. It's a very complex system. So scientists have, for a long time, have tended to, just steer clear because, they can't cope with the complexity.
And as well as an experiment in complexity, Martin's food forest innovation is also exploring forgotten sources of food, such as hops.
We'll see quite a few more hops as we go around because we grow them mainly as a vegetable, not for hop flowers. Everybody knows hop flowers are used in beer, and that's fine. If you want to grow hop flowers for your own beer, you can do that. But actually fewer people know that hop shoots are a really delicious vegetable, and we harvest those from April to July, so we're past the season now. They've been more or less stopped putting on growth now, and they'll be too tough. But during that period, we harvest a lot of hop shoots to use as a vegetable. They're truly delicious, just stir-fried for a minute or two.
Can you remember when you first came across that idea?
I read about it from accounts from traditional hop-growing regions of the world. Because basically every hop-growing region of the world, you'll find people traditionally eat hop shoots.
So much of this is lost knowledge.
It is. There's a lot of lost knowledge, which we're just rediscovering in a way. Yeah.
Which in itself is becoming an innovation.
Because actually, some of these things can definitely be replacements for annual veg.
Martin isn't arguing that we can feed the world with food forests, but he is convinced they can make a significant contribution, and partly influenced by his work, their numbers in the UK are growing.
In terms of productivity, you can think of it as an orchard plus. So nobody thinks of an orchard as an unproductive environment because we all know orchards can produce lots of crops, and forest gardens can be similarly productive. It's unrealistic to think there's going to be food forests over 100% of the land. That's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, there are already several thousand in this country, and most of them you don't hear about because people are just doing their own thing, and they're not shouting about them. I mean, what we need is more complexity in the landscape. So these kind of systems could have a big role to play in that.
Martin now has 2 food forests, a glasshouse for tropical food plants and a nut forest. His project, the Agroforestry Research Trust, is a charity mostly funded by selling seeds, plants and running courses for people interested in starting their own forest experiments, all of which he's convinced will be increasingly important for the future.
One of the interesting things about plant choice or variety choice here in Devon is that we don't have the climate that we had 50 years ago. We have the climate of Midwest France from 50 years ago. That's how much the climate has changed here. So a lot of French varieties do fantastically well here, like a sweet chestnut and other things as well. And that's part of the climate change adaptation, that we're going to have to do in the future is lose any kind of romantic attachment to local varieties. That's quite challenging for some people. Those varieties will still be useful somewhere further north, but like old Devon varieties of apple, for example, they haven't been doing well for us here. They've been flowering twice a year and then not fruiting very well.
He's also convinced his forest innovation can contribute ideas to other types of agriculture.
A lot of mainstream farmers are going to find the kind of complexity we've been talking about a big, big challenge. And to them, I would go and I'd say, we'll start with less complexity, Start with some trees in your field. Every field in this country should have trees in it, basically. And they don't have to be that complex systems to begin with. You could just have, like farmers are doing, you could just have some lines of trees in fields that you still cultivate in between, called alley cropping. So you still grow your potatoes or your wheat or whatever it is, in between those lines of trees.
Bringing what kind of benefit?
Even that, which is only a 2-crop system, is vastly better than a monoculture. So the crop gets wind shelter from the trees and potentially help in droughts. There's a tendency to think trees trees and other crops will always compete, and that's not always the case. In droughts, trees can actually often supply water rather than taking it all for themselves. And you get a diversity of crops as well. And going forward, farming needs diversity. You can't put your eggs in one basket in the future. It's not going to be safe to do that. We're already having a drought this year. It's not going to be long until we have 2 droughts in succession. And then what are people going to do if they have crop failures 2 years in succession? Their businesses might fail.
Food forest pioneer Martin Crawford, ending our trio of innovation stories. All finalists in this year's BBC Food and Farming Awards. And the winner will reveal all at the end of November in a special edition featuring the results of all of this year's categories.